So let's tackle the implementation context now. In our organization, we follow what we call a hybrid agile approach in terms of implementation. And that approach combines an initial intense discovery followed by agile sprints and the release of functionality by sprint or sprint groups. To have a successful implementation of a headless strategy, we believe it's important to map out the work to some level of detail during the initial discovery. As a part of the process, you address early on key issues around architecture, interfaces, content management processes, and even user interface design in some cases need to be addressed. We overlay this with project management and collaboration processes, the right kind of tools necessary for dev, testing, code management, and release management. The only difference is when we are looking to do continuous delivery, let's say every 2 weeks, we will shrink the QA and the UAT process for release, for each release, and automate to the extent possible the release process. We'll go into some important aspects of this approach in the next few slides. So the discovery process is where all requirements are finalized, high-level architecture outlined, and any governance aspects worked out. Given the nature of the project, we break it down into a clear understanding of the pain points we're addressing, outlining the front-end architecture, content governance, content model, and approaches and constraints around interface APIs for both content and commerce systems. If done right, you should end with documented requirements, a documented architecture doc that outlines both the front-end architecture as well as overall integrations, content model for use in the headless CMS, and user stories distributed by sprint. Together, these can be used to create a high-level project plan. So I do have a question for Nick here. We have in our implementations that we've seen, we have incorporated the onboarding process from your professional services team. We actually mesh that with our discovery process, and it's very effective. So can you talk about that a little bit in detail, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you all mesh that with your discovery process, because that's entirely the intention of our professional service offerings and our solution architecture team. Kind of the terminology we use a lot is they're not hands-on keyboards, so they're going to be a really strategic, consultative, but still very technical resource to help the implementation partner, you all, and also our joint customer be successful in their engagement with Contentful. And we've got a few different packages, as I'm sure you're aware, that range from 4 to 8 weeks, and the subject matter can cover everything from content modeling to migrations to delivery architectures, and on and on, a lot of the different things that you mentioned there. And I think what's great about that is you get that insight from someone who's an expert in the product, in it every single day, and has worked on a lot of different implementations with a lot of different variables. And then you can mesh that knowledge with the knowledge that a team like Ignitiv brings, where you have that deep integration knowledge, and you're really familiar with the other platforms involved, and we can come together to provide a really comprehensive solution to our joint customer to make sure that we're building a really solid foundation for the project moving forward. And ideally, if they have technical teams internally that are going to be taking part in this, we can also help get them up to speed with the platform and kind of all the tooling available to help them be successful, over the course of the discovery and the initial build, but for the lifetime of their, transition into headless architecture and, ideally their stay in the composable space.
So as a functional module, headless content platform as a part of the overall headless commerce solution is new to a typical commerce team. Headless content platform provides the structural framework for content to be organized properly for reuse, the content creation process to be streamlined, and for efficient delivery of content to the front end side. This is why we break down the work involved in the configuration of the headless content platform into the three areas mentioned here: modeling, governance, and delivery architecture. Modeling will cover an assessment of the content inventory, definition of content types, and initial content model, and the ability to test iteratively and improve. Governance will look at roles and permissions for different kinds of content team members, the publishing workflow, and the approval process. And finally, delivery architecture will address things like content preview, the interfaces between headless CMS and the front end, and the continuous delivery process. So once again, back to you, Nick. If you can talk of your platform capabilities in the context of these three areas around content governance, modeling, and delivery architecture.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of good stuff on this slide, like lots of good points. And I think, where I would start here is that, at Contentful, really like modeling is going to be the thing that's at the center of everything, because our content modeling capabilities give you, the implementer, and our customers full control over your content types and how they're structured, with the ability to store data in properly typed fields that validate all of the content that editors are producing. And so then the suite of developer tooling enables technical teams to manage the creation, modification, and release of those structures programmatically. So, again, when we talk about kind of like the traditional tension between tech and marketing, I think, that's kind of two ways to manage the same thing that can help leave a lot of that, or relieve a lot of that tension. And then, sitting on top of that, you have the governance layer. So, we have a really flexible permissions model that can help businesses build workflows and approval processes that fit their working style. Like, we don't want to have to just put kind of like our take on workflow and permissions onto a business and then force them to figure out how to fit into that. Because, like we've, I think, established over the course of these, there's a lot of complexity to these implementations, and like every team and their needs is a little bit different. And tasks and workflow states in the context of a single piece of content are a really key part of that. But even those are something that teams can kind of mold to fit their needs. And then finally, just speaking to the delivery side of things, like once the content has been created and approved, which are kind of those first two areas we talked about, the preview API allows teams to build real-time preview tools to confirm that all the content being released will look and work exactly how they plan. And again, that has no opinion on what the front end is. Those are preview tools that are built to integrate with the thing that's chosen for the project to fit that customer's needs exactly. And from there, we essentially get to the point where we've created content, we've put it through a workflow, we've previewed it, and we're launching it. And so that's, another big piece of what we do in our platform is, enterprise release management, because odds are, to use sort of the classic example that you hear around the holidays all the time, like Black Friday, right? You're not just going to be updating a single piece of content for Black Friday and publishing that when you click publish. Like, you're going to have a big chunk of content that you want to make sure all of it is approved and ready to go and can be scheduled to release at the same time. And that's what Launch is actually the name of our tool. Our enterprise release management tool is really focused on, is giving content creators a way to create those, to kind of like top off that whole process by really tightly bundling together all of the content that goes live together, schedule that out, and know that things are going to work as you expect, and be live at the exact moment that you need them to be.
Okay, so the next part of the implementation is what we do is an agile delivery CI/CD process, so as to automate the release process to the extent possible. And like with any other software project, the release process is enabled through a CI/CD infrastructure. So as part of this headless implementation, we maintain code bases grouped by the storefront, the headless CMS, and the commerce services. Even in the storefront, we can have multiple code bases if you are going to modularize the development and have different teams work on different aspects of the storefront. Whether GCP or AWS or Azure, we can host it on any of these cloud platforms. They all provide build as a service, an artifacts registry, and source repositories as Git. What this enables us to do is, deploy a certain part of the storefront independent of the other using the CI/CD pipeline. And this is very flexible, where your marketer can, just change the, layout of a home page and deploy it rather than deploying the whole website. The infrastructure will also enable, auto build, verify, and deploy pipeline upon code commit by the development team. And since we manage the branches, Git branches across development, QA, and prod environments, all these commits are built and deployed on those respective environments in an immediate manner using the CI/CD pipeline. So as you can see here, one of the big question that will always face a retailer when they decide to go to a headless architecture is whether you migrate and go live with a new platform once everything is done in a big bang approach, or whether you look at a phased approach to the deployment process. When you go with a big bang approach, you essentially look to address all the changes in a single project and go live only once after all the pages are converted into the new architecture. This follows how historically projects would be, but may not be a necessarily good approach for a headless implementation. A phased approach would entail only certain e-commerce pages to be migrated over to the new framework initially, and then release in chunks over time the remaining pages. The benefit of phased approach is that you can tackle the important pages first that can possibly contribute the most to a higher conversion rate on your website. That way, the retailer will realize the benefits of going to a headless architecture sooner. However, it will have more overheads than a typical big bang approach. One example of a phased approach is outlined here, where we first do the home page, the header, footer, followed by category and product pages. And then if you have store locations, store functionality, followed by the other pages. Basically, you do the navigation pages of the site first, and then you do the cart and checkout pages later. So there is a method to this process. For example, this kind of phasing for one of our clients was dictated by the fact that the marketers made the most changes on the home page and the marketing landing pages. A quick big win would be to introduce the content management process as a part of the solution early on with this phase, which in turn will allow for a better and more enthusiastic embrace of the new solution within the organization as well. There are other considerations at play as well, and it will influence the phasing approach uniquely for each merchant, such as search, which can be a big pain point. And taking this solution approach as in a headless architecture, you can use the commerce services search, or you can federate out the search to a third-party service if that is the direction in which the retailer wants to go.
Okay. I think the questions are for both Blake and Nick, and we've touched upon this earlier in the discussion. Any further perspectives you want to share on a big bang versus a phased implementation?
I'm gonna go because Nick's got to answer the last few, so I'm gonna steal it now. Yeah, to your point, Rajiv, we talked about this in some of the previous sections, but I think the big benefit here is you can work iteratively. So, and depending on the way the organization is structured, the category page may be managed by a completely different team than the cart page that's managed by a different team than the checkout page, right? So you don't have to have everybody all involved at once. I think you can realize the benefits a lot faster. So to the point, Deepak, that you were making, right? If you could change the homepage and marketing landing pages first, if that's where you can get the most value, why wait 9 months to try to get the full value if you could get partial value in 2 months and a little bit more in 2 months and a little bit more in 2 months, right? And I think that we can all relate that a giant 9-month project has a lot higher chance of things slipping or just not happening than 5 smaller 2-month projects. Just that doesn't have to come to software implementations for us to relate with that. And then the other thing that I would say to those that are wanting to do this approach or even trying to have digital transformation, which almost everybody that we talk to is in this at some level, the larger the organization, the more challenging, the bigger the ship you're trying to steer, right? And so we've had companies that say, no, we want to do it all. We want to replace the whole, commerce platform. It's a nightmare. So we go through this long process with them and we build this ROI, and then they present it to the board or the executive team. And they're like, no, we don't have budget or time for that. We want to focus on these other projects. And so I would almost advise the people who are lobbying for this, find the small win. And as you win and have an ROI and a benefit and say, look, we did this and it took 6 weeks and it only took $100,000 and we're realizing this kind of ROI, you can drive change within your organization that way. And so, from an implementation standpoint, there's obvious benefits, but I just can't reinforce enough the organizational benefits, the risk mitigation, right? What if you picked the wrong platform and you went through a 10-month implementation versus 2 months of trying something and learning that that's not going to work for you, right? From a risk mitigation perspective, there's so much benefit from a value creation. So I just think a piece by piece approach is kind of the way of the future. That I think folks like Kibo and Contentful are making more and more available, that you don't have to be an enterprise organization to be able to take this type of approach.
That's the gist of my comment too, that I feel like without belaboring the point too much, I think we're all very much on the same page that, realizing value early and often is a really key component to these projects, and something that, working in this type of architecture uniquely enables, right? Like you can't do this with a big monolithic system where you've got kind of like one gigantic thing you're trying to move from point A to point B, and I mean, I think like it's the beauty of the composable approach is, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is breaking things down into small pieces that work well together, that can be managed by small, agile groups. So I think I would say it goes without saying, but I've said it to death, that I'm, absolutely a big proponent of the phased approach, and like get to that value as early and often as you can.
Yeah, and I think this was a question that was kind of asked earlier. We see it in the commerce space. I'm sure you guys see it in the content space as well, but a lot of platforms have been around for a long time and have a lot of great functionality, and they might even let you launch with only using their cart and checkout, but they're spinning up the whole system. And so it's like taking to use a boat analogy again, right? It's taking a cruise ship and saying, hey, I only want the restaurant in the cruise ship. And they're saying, yeah, we can do that, but we got to fire up the whole cruise ship, right? Versus being able to just have a restaurant portion and not have to have the whole cruise ship. And so this is where that microservices, API first architecture matters versus another commerce platform that says, yeah, we can be headless. Yeah, we have a headless offering, right? You're not going to get the benefits that you get with a truly composable microservices based API first offering.
Okay. Going ahead, I just wanted to present an example of a phased implementation schedule. It is actually a real timeline for one of our customers. The work was broken down into, homepage, header, footer, followed by category and search pages, followed by product pages and structured content that they had on the site, such as blogs and articles, and finally followed by the cart and the physical stores functionality, and followed by the static content pages. So checkout continued to remain on the commerce platform just because of the complexity of having payments, taxes, and all that are part of the checkout page. So please remember the front-end architecture needs to account for a lot of other front-end integrations that have to be created anew as outlined in the solution architecture, which is precisely why the initial release for the homepage is 8 weeks long, since you have to consider the Google Analytics integrations or any personalization integrations that you may have with your previous site. Your architecture will have to work in a model that allows for the existence of the current site, even as you make changes to certain sections of it. A more big bang like approach may have reduced this timeline by say 25%, 30%. However, the time to returns as put by the Kibo and the Contentful team would have elongated significantly, and the retailer would not have realized the benefits of going to a headless architecture till the end of a long project, like a 7-month, 9 months project.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this, Deepak, right? If I'm a marketer and I can go to my boss and say, hey, in 10 weeks, we can completely redo the homepage and have a system and a workflow and governance that works for our organization, and we can, test this and realize a certain ROI, I'm much more likely than if I go to them and say, hey, in 36 weeks, we can have a whole new content management system in place, right? It's just an easier conversation internally, and the organization can properly evaluate the benefits of that change before they go through the next 26 weeks to do the whole website.
And I like to, even thinking of those first 10 weeks to value, looking at this example, like you see some really high impact things in there, things like roles, workflow, preview, homepage. Like those are things that they're going to affect a pretty broad spectrum of users, from obviously like your tech team who's going to be implementing this thing to your non-technical content creators, the marketing team probably who's working with this thing, and the homepage. So like your users are going to see it. So I think you're going to get a lot of feedback from a lot of different groups, and ideally it's all good and you're seeing like some really strong ROI on that. But if it's not, to Blake's earlier point, like you only spent 10 weeks on it, like figure out the little pieces that you need to retool, maybe like shift things a little bit, and then, tackle it the way that you really need to based on the feedback you got in that first phase. Like I love that.
So a final word on the team structure that we typically put in such a headless implementation. In the legacy world, you would probably have one team, or at best, you'll have a team split between the front end and the back end development team. In case of a headless implementation, you can potentially break down the team into a front end app team that works solely on the storefront, an integration team that works on the API, and a content and commerce platform teams that work on the headless CMS content part and the commerce services part. If your front-end framework enables the use of what we call as micro components, that is, you further break down the storefront into smaller reusable components, there's a possibility of better efficiencies in having an integrated front end and integration team by specific micro functionality. So you can have a team that works on the navigation pages, you'll have a team that works on the cart functionality, and you'll have a team that works on the search functionality. So each of these teams can be independent, and they will deliver the things in a manner that will come cohesive at the CI/CD layer into building up the final storefront. Please note that the business analyst and the QA teams have to be a part of this team, who they will have the end-to-end view of the customer journey and experiences and dictate the functionality to both the front end and the back end team, and possibly identify which third-party services are needed on the website to enrich the customer experience. For a mid-market customer with a site of average complexity, our experience suggests that the team will look like one project manager, one business analyst, one content platform specialist, 2 to 3 front-end developers, 2 to 3 backend developers, and 2 QA resources. This is a team. It's not a very, very large team, but this is a team that can, potentially go and convert legacy architecture into a headless architecture for a mid-market customer.
And this brings us to the end of the webinar. Any closing comments from Kibo or Contentful?
I can
Blake.
start off. I think my last thought, and this is again this is a regular occurrence that we see, is that part of the reason you want to move to headless is because you can kind of provide the business team more of what they want and the technical team more of what they want, right? It's kind of the benefit of this composable structure. But I've also seen a lot of business teams relegate themselves to the back because they're not quite sure how to select a headless platform, right? They want to see the admin, they want to see how they can create content, but they're not sure, especially in the commerce realm, hey, this is a headless solution, it's a back-end solution. Let's let the development team or let's let the IT team make this selection, because it's a little bit conceptual how a headless platform is going to work versus if I had a big monolith, I could see all the buttons and how it all works together. And so I think just kind of maybe some advice or some things that we've seen work really well is, you have to have those two teams work together. It doesn't take a MBA to figure out that if you're buying a software to make the business team's life better and the business team is not a part of the selection process, it's not going to work very well, right? Those teams have to come together and work together well. And so some of the best projects that we've seen is where the business team can really, if I could break it down into 3 steps, the business team go define the requirements. What do you need in a commerce engine? What's the end experience result that you want? What is the functionality you want on the product page and the category page and the cart page, and how do you prioritize those things and give those to the technical team and have a way to evaluate that properly, right? And then the technical team can go look at the API documentation. They can find out if those things are available there and rank that and say, hey, platform 1 does 60% of this out of the box, but it's really easy to extend it. Platform 2 does 40% and platform 4 does 80%, right? And you can actually, at that point, the business team and the technical team can come in and talk about the pros and cons of both of the systems. One's more extensible, open, right? The business team really doesn't quite know what that means, so they don't know how to value if that's important or not. And the technical team says, well, we can build it on this platform, but they don't really understand how important that is for a business requirement. So I would say just organizationally, it's really important that those two teams get on the same page. And I think that's where a company like Ignitiv, or I know the folks at Contentful and Kibo, like we're having those conversations day in and day out, and can help both of those teams understand how do you value and weigh those pros and cons. And I think that is equally as important to picking the right software.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really valuable thing that I think is part of this whole paradigm shift that oddly we hadn't touched on over the course of these just yet, which is kind of that shift from IT or tech or whoever kind of traditionally being the software procurement part of an organization. And I think, I'm sure everyone on the call is seeing this too, that as we transition more into this ecosystem, we're seeing a lot more of that onus shift into marketing, right? And that's not me saying marketing or business owners or whoever should own the procurement process. I think the really cool thing about that is it's becoming cross-functional. And I think when you see that happening in the procurement process, or, when we can help guide our, prospective customers, our joint customers down that road and kind of help them say by prodding them to say, hey, what does the business side think about this? Hey, what does the tech side think about this? How do you feel about that? What questions do you have? I think the more you can get that dialogue happening really, really early, especially internally in an organization that's evaluating this approach, you're just going to build some really healthy habits that you can take all the way through the implementation and the life cycle of this software. Because from the very beginning, you're going to have those cross-functional stakeholders working together to make the decision. So, when it comes down to ideally the end of that first 10-week period where something doesn't work right, it's not a bunch of finger pointing. It's more chin scratching and looking at the analytics and the data and figuring out how we pivot and do this right. And I think ultimately just sets the foundation for a much more healthy relationship and direction towards creating ROI, we'll say.
And thanks, Nick. And that'll conclude our presentation. And for any viewers, any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to anyone from Ignitiv, Kibo, or Contentful. We'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks.